Good evening, and before we get to Sokuzan's Confusion Intrusion, we're still running our month-long fundraiser here for Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, where we're trying to raise funds to replace some seriously damaged roofs on some of our properties. And just every week trying to give you a little update of some of the things we're doing here at Sokukoji to help others. And I just wanted to let all of you know that join us virtually from abroad that we do offer residential retreats. We've been having people over the last, maybe 7 years traveling from all over the country and even a few parts of the world to come join us. That the residents here hold over 30 hours of meditation, 52 weeks a year, over 9 hours of book study a week. So if you're interested in joining us, please feel free to contact us for retreat practice. And we also, like we broadcast the Dharma talks, we also make our book studies available on a daily basis, and you can join through the video conferencing program Zoom. So if you're interested in deepening your practice with us, we'd be happy to have you participate. And as we said, just trying to raise some funds this month to help continue to offer these programs to the community locally and abroad, and continue to offer our services to those that are in need. So Sokuzan will be with us shortly, and before I forget, you can make your donations on our website at www.sokukoji.org through PayPal or with credit card, or you can send checks to Sokukoji Buddhist Community at 33 Anderson Court, Battle Creek, Michigan 49017. Thank you.
The title of this evening's Dharma talk is The Conclusion Intrusion. Worked a lot on that title. So what am I saying here by that title? When we come to a conclusion about anything based on wanting things to be different, wanting things to be the same, wanting, something else, wanting to understand, wanting to know, we tend to even spontaneously come to a conclusion, come to an opinion, come to an idea. Well, that's the way it is. This is how it is. That shouldn't be that way. This should be that way. And when we do that, what I mean by intrusion is you have a natural open dimension of your consciousness that is happening all the time. Whether you're at the store, whether you're at doing your laundry or fixing a meal, you're in the restroom, you're in the shower, talking to your friends, your mate, or whatever, there's always this openness is happening with you in your environment, in your, you could say, relationship to everything. Your room, your own thought patterns, the apparent thought patterns of others, if you want to call them that. And it's very healthy if you can just be present, just receive. Whatever's happening, just receive. As soon as you conclude anything, even if it's the slightest little click in your brain pan of, aha, or that's not right, or that shouldn't be. This intrudes on your awareness. This conclusion actually blurs or compromises your insight into whatever is happening. And it happens in such a way that we don't even know it. We don't even know that the very understanding we are endeavoring to have in our communication with the world, with the others, is that we are coming to a conclusion about the very situation that we're trying to communicate with or understand. Sitting practice of meditation, if you do it enough, because the practice there is to sit down and just receive. Just receive the thoughts that are coming, the memories, the hopes, the fears, whatever's happening without any conclusion. Nothing extra. The birds outside, just receive. The footsteps in the hallway or someone shuffling furniture around in the other room, just receive. No addition. Through the practice of meditation, through awareness practice, we get better and better. You could say there's no credential involved, so it isn't like something we can add up. We just notice that we're more aware. Someone else might notice that we talk less. They might even ask us, "Are you okay?" And you might say, "I'm fine." You say, "Why?" And they might say, "Well, you don't seem to be saying anything." And you might have to say, you might not say this, but if you were to say something, you might say, "Well, I'm finally listening to you. I usually don't. I usually think about stuff and add stuff, but I'm listening to what you say. I'm receiving what you're saying." This does not mean that something happening out here, that there couldn't be a natural conclusion, not based on trying to get something, not based on your interior motivation to be in control, to be separate, to be somebody special who knows stuff, but just a natural conclusion that just comes out of the environment. It just comes out of a natural movement or dance with, you could say, the five elements. Just the environment that's created by you being in a room, or in the yard, or on the road, on a path, and with others. There's always some kind of environment. You notice if you get together and have a meal, there's a certain kind of environment in your family, your community. In our case, we eat together as a community in the evening. A certain kind of environment. Sometimes it's a little bit flat. Sometimes there's a lot of humor or levity, or there's a discussion about a particular thing. But it's a very, very interesting to observe that and watch the way the energy moves. Just observe. Do that in such a way that you actually begin to make friends with those parts of your mind that you would like to shut off or shut down or control or change. Something you'd like to be someone else, somebody else, or have a different kind of thought pattern, emotional pattern. And it's not that you couldn't change that or modify that or make life a little easier for yourself, but you probably are not going to be too successful if you go in there with, as they say, hammer and tong and try to push it around and manipulate it. You might have some more success by just watching the way in which you can keep confusing things, or the way you keep going in and modifying or changing, or as I sometimes say, meddling with your mind. Don't meddle. Don't meddle with this, or meddle with anyone else. If it is necessary for you to do something and you're just present, if your primary intention is just to be here and to just receive, as it is when we sit down and do sitting meditation, the instruction is, as for those of you who have taken this training to heart, sit down, hold still, just observe. And what happens when we observe? We just observe. We're not saying just observe and add, just observe and judge, just observe, but don't pay any attention to that. Look at this more and that less, or push this away. You shouldn't be observing that. The feeling quite often that we've all had is, what am I feeling like this for? Don't rotate from just observe into a why question. If you do, you've actually stopped observing the very thing that you're asking about. It can be very subtle. It is very subtle. And there doesn't seem to be any credential that we get from functioning in that way, from being you could say, a good observer. You don't get some kind of a pat on the back for that. It could even feel more difficult or more irritating to do that. So when I say conclusion, intrusion, I'm saying that by coming to a conclusion, if I were to use a visual metaphor, it's like, here's your awareness and you're concluding something, and that intrudes on your observation, your awareness of what is occurring in any given situation. Sometimes this occurs because we feel threatened. Sometimes this occurs is because we're starting to feel more confused than is actually comfortable for us. So we want to stop that. We want to change that. We want to intrude. We want to conclude and intrude in the open dimension of what is happening in that particular moment. And we'd rather have everything tied up in the knots of our thought patterns rather than actually just be an open dimension where you're not sure what's going on. Just observe what we call thoughts and see if there actually are thoughts. Are there thoughts? Do they have a front and a back? Are they separate from each other like railroad cars? Is there some kind of quality or texture to thoughts? What are they? Do they belong to someone? Do you produce them? Or do you receive them? Or a little of both? What actually is happening there? If you understand what's happening there, it might be very difficult for you to put that into words so others can understand it better or read about it. It seems just the nature of thinking is such that it seems, coming from someone who's been doing this a while, it looks like the only way you can understand it is to observe it and not to conclude. If you conclude, you've actually left that arena or that field of awareness where thoughts are, where it's possible to see what thoughts are. I can tell you what they are, but it won't be helpful to you because it's a conclusion. You ready? They're not separate. They're not items. we separate them out in order to try to control or manipulate our lives and get our lives to do this instead of that. Or I want to feel this way and not that way. And of course, the way we do that, the way it's recommended here, is to sit down and actually train your mind to function in that way, to train your mind to just watch what's happening without objecting to it, without agreeing with it, and without distracting yourself from it. Those, in Buddhism, those are called the three poisons of passion, aggression, and ignorance. Passion, I want it. Aggression, I don't want it. And ignorance, who cares? Or distracting ourselves into something else, more sophisticated form of ignorance. Questions would be good if you have them.
You were talking about the open dimension that is here all the time, or that we have available to us, and you were talking about the knots. Why do we prefer to stay with the knots?
So the knot is actually, it gives us the self-centered mind, which we think we are somebody, and when there's too much open space, the self-centeredness, the ego, who we think we are, that identity, starts to get a little freaked out. So, but if we go to a knot, or an opinion, or an idea, or a concept, or a conclusion, that's actually more comfortable. That's like we all know someone, I'm sure there's no one here in this room, but we also know someone who's very opinionated. And if you talk to them for very long, you can actually notice they're very opinionated. And people have that in different degrees. We all have a little bit of that going on. Some people are really extremely fixed and opinionated and know what life is about, and this is the way it is, and that's what they think, and that's what they believe, and that's what it is. And if you want to have a discussion with them, you have to listen to their idea, and they're not into having a conversation about it. Other than maybe a token one was like, well, what would you like me to teach you, kind of thing. Again, it's not wrong. It's not that it's incorrect. It's just that some people are so afraid of life that they'd rather lock down on some kind of a belief or something that's true as opposed to something that's untrue, and live with that kind of situation, because their their imaginary self that they think is so real feels stronger, is more protected. So we'll buy into some knot of ideas and conclusions and understandings and labeling and accusations and judgments and everything. It's a whole ball of philosophy of me, and what I think and what I know. And that comes in differing degrees. Some people are extremely tied up in that, and basically just have to listen to them. Because if you do suggest something different, especially if they're really intelligent, are able to handle language and concepts really well, you can just see that they're not really interested in what you think at all. If you were to ask their opinion, and I'm sure they have plenty, they will just tell you that you're incorrect, and you just need to think, you need to look at it more closely, or you're misunderstanding this or something. Go ahead.
What does the ego get out of going back to the knots that hurt us?
Temporary safety. It gets temporary, and it won't be responsible for the discomfort. It will actually blame. Any discomfort that's felt is because of something else, or someone else, or something someone did to you. Occasionally have variations on that where you actually start to blame yourself. It can go the other way. It'll either go, that's to blame, and if this goes to blame, then it becomes into guilt. And I'm so terrible, I just can't ever get anything right. Everything's going haywire. Every time I try to do this or that, I'm not smart enough. Junshu.
What's the difference between blaming ourselves and seeing that we're creating our own suffering?
So the blaming is actually imputing or believing something and then following it up with, that's true. Actually encouraging ourselves to go in, and possibly even encouraging ourselves to look for some kind of solution where we won't feel that way. And it could be as simple as drugs. It could be as simple as some kind of medication that will help us stop having that kind of a feeling. So it could be that. And what was the other part of the question? What's the difference between that and
Blaming ourselves and seeing that we're creating our own.
when you begin to see that you're creating your own suffering, then you're beginning to, when you see that, you're beginning to take the fuel lines, the energy away from that. And that can be difficult also, because you're kind of in no man's land, no person's land, no woman's land. You're in a place where it's hard to get a reference point other than the problems you're making for yourself. So it's a challenging area, and the only way, I'm biased in this area, the only way I know of to work with that is through an awareness practice that starts to make the awareness more powerful and more in the lead, rather than the thinking process, the analyzing process, the judging, condemning. Just takes some of that energy, it goes into the awareness, which awareness is just an open dimension. So it takes time. Go ahead.
Can we see that we're creating our own suffering and not blame ourselves?
Yes, we can.
Wow.
Practice. Unrelenting practice. It's like you were doing today. You were the Donan today. You were in here sitting. I think there was one other person in the Zendo. At least when I came in, it was Michael, I think. You're in here. You're sitting there all afternoon. That's how it's done. I'm not saying there isn't some other way of approaching it. There probably is, but I don't know. This looks like a way that doesn't. You don't have to take medications. You don't have to. You can just do it with your mind. You've been meditating, what, 2 years? 3 years? Whatever it's been. Keep going. Imagine what it would be without this. Imagine what it would be had you moved to Utah, joined the, what is that thing people join?
Ski club.
Ski clubs? Yeah. And you're there, then you'd be out ahead of your skis, as they've been using that metaphor these days. Yeah, you're getting out ahead of your skis. Who's skiing? Not skiing. It's a valid question. It's just that it takes a while. We've been doing this for a long time. Just in your lifetime alone, you spend the first 20, 23, 24 years buying into the confusion and wrestling with your mind, and then you run into something where it says you don't have to do that. You could actually sit down and just look at that, rather than continually add on more fuel to the fire, or run in a bigger circle that looks like healing. Run in an even larger circle that looks like a solution. 3/4 of the way around, it's a solution, but then you notice something's very familiar about this apparent straight line. It seems to have a curve in it. Everything happens in cycles, except what doesn't happen. If it doesn't happen, there's no cycle. If you don't know what I mean, then reflect on it for a while.
Shane from Grand Rapids has a question.
Okay?
What is observing?
So observing is through your senses, through your sense of seeing, sense of smell, taste, touch, and thinking, is just observe whatever's moving. There's in each one of the 6 sense fields, there's an object, there's a sound, there's a sight, there's a smell, there's a taste, there's something we touched, and there's thoughts or emotions or memories or whatever's happening in that particular sensorium, part of the sensorium called the mind. Just receive. So whatever's moving, just observe it and don't do anything with it. Do as little as possible. And if you do something with it, like if you hear a bird outside and you think that's a cardinal, you've done something with it. So in that case, it's not about not doing that, it's about observing that you're doing that. Just notice that you're naming. You don't have to follow it up with naming the naming. I think I'm naming. That's a different kind of meditation practice. It's called a practice of recollection, where you're actually keeping track of everything you do. I don't recommend that.
And that example you gave with the bird outside and we label it the cardinal. Is there a difference between the thought of it's a cardinal and a mental image of a cardinal showing up?
No, the mental image you don't really create. It just shows up. Whereas the naming has a little bit of action to it. You're actually doing that. More so, because it's a conceptual thing. You're actually giving it a name. It's not about not doing that. So it's not about stopping that. It's about observing that too. That's also a movement. The naming is a movement. So insofar as you can, hold very still and do nothing except observe. In other words, and the other word I use in place of observe or as another way of describing the same thing is just receive. Whatever's coming through any one of the sense fields, including the mind, just receive. Just be the person at the gate, any one of the gates, and just watch whatever comes through. Sound comes through, fine. You don't even say fine, because that would be adding on to it. But whatever happens, just observe.
Lindsay from Traverse City asks, is mind something other than thoughts?
So different ways of working with that. The idea, mind is the way it's generally used, and the way I would use it. It's just the whole situation of mind. Thoughts, ideas, memories, space, consciousness is mind, and then thoughts are concepts and ideas and names that come up in that particular area that we call the mind or the consciousness. And so it's like the objects that arise. If you wanted a strong metaphor, it would be like mind is like water and thoughts are like fish. The fish don't know about the water. They think it's air. At least the fish I've talked to. Shoot.
Has two questions. The
Yes.
first is, what can we do when we notice that we are engaging in another solution and it fails?
That's good. Engaging in a solution that fails. I think you just did it. So don't take it to the bank. Don't add on to that. I shouldn't do that. Don't add on to that. I'll do that differently so it won't fail. Don't actually take that as some kind of license to keep on that same kind of repetitive coming back in and trying it again and doing something again. Do as little as possible. I sometimes say, don't do anything unless you have to. If you're doing, think about it, just reflect on it for a minute. If you're doing anything at all that you don't have to do, what's the point? What's the idea behind that? Why would you do anything you didn't have to do? Yet we do. We think, well, I better do this because, I better do that because, well, if I don't, then this might happen, that might happen. This doesn't mean you shouldn't get vaccination or something.
She has a second question.
Go right ahead. This is Unse?
This is.
She gets? Okay.
I think referring to when you were talking about the circularity, you said what doesn't happen doesn't go in a circle.
Mm-hmm.
She says what doesn't happen.
Things that aren't circular. Not funny. You could say that the space in which things occur is not an occurrence. You know, we have to use some kind of metaphor. We have to use some kind of concept, to even communicate at all. So, but in order for anything to occur, there needs to be some kind of a space. There needs to be a room for people to walk in. There needs to be water for fish to swim in. So there's some kind of a spatial quality. And consciousness or awareness is a space that you can't locate it, but there seems to be. I mean, you can actually look at your own mind and watch how thoughts arise. And if I, like right now, there is a space in everyone's consciousness right here that you don't know about until I'm going to say a word, and then you'll notice this will appear in that space that we were just referring to. So space is not a thing. It's not even a dimension. It has no, what's the word, ontological, it has no thing status. It's not something. It's not a thing. But if I say pink umbrella, does everybody see that in their mind's eye? Well, where was that space before I said that? What was in that space? Anything? Was there a space? This is the awareness practice actually gets us to look at what arises in a space without adding on, subtracting, dividing, without doing anything with it. So we get used to living in an open dimension where there's an incredible amount of freedom. And not freedom to be something, not freedom to not be something, but freedom to not be particularly chained to anything at all, especially your own fear. Paranoia is a concern about what's going to happen next. Awareness, this space, there is no next. It's always now. It's always right now. If you think there's a next, then you probably will wring your hands quite a bit.
Jim, Amber, and Chris are watching from Muskegon, and Jim has a question. 2 parts. If we don't conclude from our observations, will our awareness reveal the truth we hope to find through those conclusions? And secondly, is there a truth?
To the first question, no. And to the second question, so, there's in Buddhism we call it the 2 truths. A relative truth, which is a partial truth. Things exist and don't exist, and we kind of buy into that. And then there's ultimate truth, which is the basic nature of where relative truth comes from. So it has its own relative dynamics. It's very difficult to get beyond relativity, unless you're Einstein. That's a difficult question. I mean, it's difficult to answer that in such a way that we don't end up in some kind of philosophical or psychological come up with an image that would help display what it is I'm trying to say, but I don't know of anything other than a merry-go-round or something circular. It looks like it's going somewhere, but it just keeps going around and around, so it doesn't get anywhere. So it might be better to not do anything. I'm looking at Coben. Yes.
When you give the example at the pink umbrella, is that the same space as this conversation's happening in?
Good question. I would say so. Space has no location. That umbrella has no location. Just looks like it. Or
What gives this the appearance of more solidity?
we imagine it.
Is that solidity available to that area of like the pink umbrella?
What do you mean?
I'm just wondering if that could seem just as real as what
Yes.
it seemed like over there.
Yeah, reality, I mean, it comes from this, yes. That seems solid, real. But that's just a particular dimension. It's just this is just a slow-moving chunk of wood. Just like a fear, if I think that's solid. If you think something's going to happen that's going to affect you or affect your safety or something, and it's just a thought, that can be really solid and can cause you to have all kinds of reactions to it.
Question from Sanho in Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a question, then he clarifies it if in the event that you might need an example. He asks, how do you advocate alongside prisoners or other groups of people in need without being self-referential? He says, I have the opinion that prisoners have certain fundamental rights, but it's not about me. How might I support their well-being without making it all about me?
So quite a bit depends on what your relationship is to, if you're talking about prisoners or whoever they may be. If you're already with them, if you're sitting right with them, then that dynamic would have to come out of your awareness of what's happening with them. Just like with people here, some of the people here go into prisons and teach meditation, and I emphasize just meet people where they're at. Don't try to convert anybody to anything, convince anybody. Just keep the politics in your pocket. Don't necessarily go in and advocate for anything. So meeting people where they're at can be very valuable to somebody who has not had the experience of someone just being with them and someone who always has an agenda about everybody. And people who are in prison, most of the people they meet have an agenda about them, especially the guards, especially the other inmates. Very, very unusual to meet someone who is just present. So help them by example. Don't be crazy. And how do you do that? Be very aware of your craziness so that you don't fuel it, so that it doesn't overflow onto others. And Sanho, I don't know what dynamic you're coming from or what environment you're coming out of, whether it's just something abstract about prisoners in general or whether it's actual relationship to people who are incarcerated. So it could show up differently. Further questions? Especially from someone who hasn't asked a question yet. So should I leave then? Oh my God, we gotta fill up 12 minutes. Yes?
Is intrusion conclusion imagined?
Well, maybe some. The reason I use that is I'm saying that anytime you conclude something, there's no deliberate wish to intrude on anything, but when you conclude, you may have the feeling of accomplishing some kind of, at least I understand what that is. Now I understand. I can explain that because I've concluded something, usually with some kind of conceptual grasping or coming to, conclude. I've concluded that that person is crazy, or that person is dangerous, or anything. So I'm just saying that intrudes. By doing that, you might feel a little bit better off, or a little bit safer, but and you may be a little safer, but it intrudes on the awareness that might be available if you were not to conclude, that might pick up some of the nuances that would actually give you a deeper understanding of what was happening. I'll just make up an example. Say you're in a school. I know you were a teacher at one time. Say you're in a school and we hear all the terrible violence that's happening, and then somebody, you see a bunch of students and you hear some gunfire, and if you start to conclude anything about anybody that's there, you could actually be making things worse by coming out of your fear about it, that I've got to do something because somebody's gonna, and see someone that actually is trying to protect someone else and assume that that is the person who is causing the danger, when it's actually a person who's around the corner you can't see. And so you've come to a conclusion based on fear rather than based on rather than functioning based on the openness of the situation, which is risky, but actually there's more of a chance that you could see what the actual situation is. This is one of the reasons that people say they don't want to give weapons to people in schools, because if there is a shooting there in a school and people come in to protect those people, they run into a bunch of people in the school with guns. And there's no way to tell who's the shooter. It's an ideal place for a shooter, just to come into a place where everybody's armed. You couldn't pick them out. But that kind of conclusion is coming from fear. Well, let's just arm everyone. It's coming from a really highly polished form of insanity, that we're separate. And also it's about not wanting to fundamentally help the person who would do such a thing. Our whole society is such, I'm not going to get into the political part of it anymore if I can help it, but our whole society is such that the people who are really having that kind of difficulty are just shut out. There's no mental health help for people. And if there is, it's done with so much medication to shut down the problem rather than understand the problem. You know what I'm saying. Don't need to go into that particular sphere of discussion. Yes?
Michael Downing, is conclusion the same thing as the first thought that arises?
No. Not necessarily. Keep coming.
That question arose out of if that scenario were to happen and a teacher was experiencing a school shooting and his first thought or her first thought came out of a fear. I guess I was just wondering.
Well, it's, a dangerous situation. It's pretty dicey. It's, you may not be able to get it right, but making sure that you really have a lot of awareness around what is happening, then the first thought that comes up has a lot of space for that to come up in, so you can actually see what it is. And if the first thought coming out of fear is probably not first thought, it's actually a reaction to something based on being terrorized, that's probably not so good. There might have been 3 or 4 thoughts before then. Like, one of the thoughts could be, what's happening? Could have a thought that what that is, and that might be a good one to go with. What is this? Rather than jumping to some kind of a disturbance or something that is based on your presumptions or preconceptions about things. And obviously it's difficult. It doesn't mean that someone who meditates is going to be there and they're going to be the most helpful person, not necessarily. That kind of situation is difficult for anyone.
Eric in Muskegon asks, what is the difference between concluding and reflecting?
So reflecting still may have a lot of space in it, a lot of watching what's happening, watching the way things are showing up without judging, without saying this is true, that's true, this isn't true, this works, this doesn't work. Whereas concluding is more like all the investigation is over with. I know what it is, that's what it is, that's what we're going to act on. Whereas reflecting on it may be some kind of inclusiveness rather than conclusiveness, some kind of reflecting so that there's some kind of space where other things can show up. And obviously, if we go back to the example of, which has happened just lately, a shooter in a school, that's just a highly difficult place for anybody to function, because the threat level is so high there that it'd be very difficult for anyone to function with any clarity. Sometimes when people do, they either run, or they freeze, or they attack. I think so. Just like you can have anger, you can have frustration without, as I sometimes say, don't hook up your vocal cords, don't hook up your facial expression. It's possible to do that. I don't know if it's possible to do that unless you spend a lot of time as a meditator, spend some time on a cushion so you really get used to your own anger, your own discomfort, your own reactive mind, so you can see how it works. Because it's very hard to sharpen a knife right in the middle of cutting vegetables. You have to take it away from the vegetables in order to sharpen it. And you have to take this whole body-mind complex away from your life, from the everyday mundane life, and sit down, hold still, and watch how the mind works over a period of time. It's called awareness practice. We call it shikantaza, or just precisely this, which means if you sit down and hold still, whatever occurs is exactly what you need to see in order to help the awareness be more expansive and more highly prioritized, so you don't get caught in the thought patterns that tend to drag you into aggression or drag you into passion or shut you down in terms of to ignorance. You actually are starting to operate out of your awareness. Your ability to include in your own mind extends to your ability to include in your everyday life. So yes, you may feel your emotions more intensely by being a meditator because you no longer are shutting things down. Could be more, someone beginning meditation, the first few weeks, few years, could be very difficult. That's why it's necessary in our situation, not for everyone, but for some people, necessary to have a form. This is what we have here in this monastery, to have a sangha or community of people who are all trying to understand what the mind is and how it works and how to work with passion, aggression, and ignorance, how to work with suffering. A teaching person who hopefully has some experience in this, and a community of people who don't meddle with each other, don't interfere with each other, and don't gossip about each other. Unusual for any community to have that.
Is choosing to shut down a thought pattern or an emotion like a sneaky form of ignorance?
It could be, but if you know you're doing, if you know that you're, if you know someone just recently, I think it was a fellow up in Petoskey through Christina's group up there. I've never met him. I think it was someone there was saying that that when they felt really bad or depressed or something, they could just think of something joyful or happy, and they could kind of switch on out of that and just be uplifted. And I can't remember exactly what I said because it was my memory is slippery, but it was something like, that there's nothing wrong with that, just cheer up. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that at some point it might be a good idea to actually look at that without doing that to it, so you can get an idea of what the very subtle, you could even say technology is of that, how the mind actually creates that kind of sludge pit, that you could just overlay with something. So not that you couldn't do that a little bit, but it would also be good to spend some time actually going in and just looking at that with an awareness. In other words, just sharpen the blade for a while rather than jump away from the sharpening stone right into using your dull knife on a carrot. And there again, those metaphors just work a little bit.
Is there a switch that happens where that emotion, no matter how difficult it is or disrupting, just is occurring, and then I don't know how else to say it, but life is living and life is happening, you're functioning, you're doing things.
What's the question? I understand what you're follow you.
Is there a switch that happens? Does a change happen where both those things are happening at once?
Where both you're sharpening and you're manipulating something or covering something up?
Where both the emotion is, or thoughts aren't being stopped, and yet they're not, I guess,
Being indulged in?
you.
Yes, you can. Yeah, you don't have to stop thoughts. So, but the stronger the awareness is, the more there's more of a possibility of just being generous with yourself and making friends with yourself rather than fighting with yourself or shutting things down about yourself. You know, just being so fed up with certain aspects of one's mind that we just want to shut it off and we want to distract ourselves into something else. That might work for a while, but when, an example I sometimes use, if you haven't trained your mind, then an emotional tsunami comes out of left field with no story behind it. You don't know why you feel this way, and suddenly your whole mind just goes down in the dumps, and you don't know why, but you just are feeling terrible. And no, you can't blame yourself, you can't blame someone else, and so you don't know what to do about it, but it feels terrible. So if one is doing some mind training, then there's a way of working with that. But if one is not doing that, then sometimes we take our crazy mind instead of working with ourselves, which is what is being told for you to do if I'm talking to you. We take it to someone who has credentials. You know what I'm talking about. You have credentials. And then they, because of their situation, their training, then they feel compelled, you could say, to use what they know on the person. And it could be drugs that would actually stop them, might stop the suffering a little bit, may and may not. You know about that. May help and may not. But but sometimes this is without even using an awareness practice to be able to explore deeply what it is. We want to cover it up with what, the terrible thing these days seems to be opioids or something. Go ahead.
How does awareness help you become a friend to yourself?
Because you sit down and you practice and you watch through the instruction, you watch the negativity in your own mind come and go without interfering with it. You make friends with yourself. If you haven't made friends with this, it's going to be really difficult to deal with the world. There's a lot of wild and crazy situations going on. You know this everywhere. And if this hasn't been worked with in a really deep way, and you've just stuffed it or covered it up or just pretended you didn't ever feel bad, and you go out in the environment and then somebody functions in a certain way that it resonates. Maybe 15 people can have difficulty and you're not affected by it. Then you run into one particular situation where, because of the frequency you're on and the frequency they're on, they start to have aggression, and suddenly the aggression that you've been covering up for 3.5 days, 3.5 years, suddenly starts to move, and then instead of being responsible for it, which is what meditation practice will teach you to do, to be an adult. Emotions come up in you, they're yours. That does not reaffirm an ego at all. And so then what you would do is you would blame that person, and you might even project that aggression out on them, and they might look twice as aggressive to you as they did before, and someone else thinks that, well, they're manageable, and you think they're twice as aggressive because they've got not only their own aggression, which this other person can work with because they're on a frequency modulation, and you're on, you know what I mean, you're on a different channel. And yet they look twice as dangerous to you because you're reacting. We all know what this is. I'm not explaining something that's some kind of esoteric knowledge. Some people you're around are just aggravating. You agree? Unyo agrees. Some people are aggravating. So the idea here is, if you've made friends with, maybe you haven't gotten rid of your own negativity, but you actually are responsible. You know that you have difficult, aggressive kind of emotions and thoughts come and go. And you probably played around with it and found that, to some extent, know that you're not going to get rid of that. It's not going to go away. You can't meditate away your eye color. You can't meditate away something that is part of your whole body-mind complex. But you can get to know it really well so that you don't blame others for your emotions. Your emotions are always yours, even if someone else triggers them by chasing you with a hacksaw. Hopefully that never happens. More? Just so everybody knows, Jessie's a psychiatric nurse, so she's able to, she just stuck her tongue out at me. Go ahead. You don't have a question? Can't come up with something? Oh, it's too late. It's bedtime. Yes, one more question, Michelle.
How can we help the person with the gun?
Might be, might be too late to, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but it might be, that's too far down the trail maybe to do that. If the person hasn't been, something has happened way back somewhere where there was so much anger and violence going on that was just covered up, or people ignored it. And sometimes we have some children are extremely aggressive and outlandishly, aggressive, and they don't get any help. We just cover that up, and that can not blaming anybody. I'm just saying we don't have our culture doesn't even know how to handle that. We want to go to war with war. We want to hurt people who are aggressive rather than help them. I know that's how I was treated when I was growing up. It was very difficult. Further question or specific about that? I certainly understand the question. Yeah, go ahead.
What arises for me on that is it seems like there are a lot of impulses that come up from causes and conditions, and you say, well, don't hook up your vocal cords but in situations like that, it seems like the impulse outweighs any sort of
It does. And I don't have any magic formula. The only thing I can say is more awareness practice, and so that it's the imputed self-centeredness. It's that there is somebody who's mad. That until that's seen through, there's probably going to be some kind of a reactionary situation because there's someone who's upset, rather than there's just being upset. Just being upset, there's a lot of space around that. And the karma that shows up as any individual, if the self-centeredness has been seen through, then that karma may still show up as dissatisfaction or discomfort or irritation or aggression or whatever, but it can't find a person to vote for it. So therefore, you may still feel it, and this is why it's tricky, or you could say it's confusing to all of us, because if there's a strong emotion, what do? We abandon the emotion, and we go to the person who's having the emotion, and there isn't one. If we have a strong emotion about anything, we abandon that, and we deliberately create duality by, instead of it's just that, there isn't anything but that. We leave it in some way to go to, because it gives us some kind of illusion of being either getting control, or it's because of this, or I'm getting a raw deal because look how bad I feel. Some kind of polarity gives us the illusion that we can get away from it, we can control it, we can stop it. So this is a awareness practice over long periods of time, I feel, will help with that. Thank you so much.
We'll stand and dedicate the merit in the back of our red chant books, and again, I'll remind everybody about the donation boxes in the hallway. And as Chazon said at the beginning, we also have donations and receive donations online through PayPal. Please help us as you are able. Thank you.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Sa as the great Prajna Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with